All right, let's get our sampling gear together. Yeah. So we're at Green Lake right now, and we're testing the water because we're going to send a sample back to SoundCitizen, which is our lab, and we're going to test it for spices and lots of organic compounds such as pollutants and toxins.
SoundCitizen is really a network of citizens and students and scientists who all work together to try to understand how the chemicals that we use in our daily lives are ending up in Puget Sound. We're receiving water samples from citizens all over the Puget Sound region, and we're filtering them and then collecting the chemicals that are in those water samples so we can analyze the compounds that are present and how much of those compounds are present. Most of the stories that we hear about chemicals in the environment are with a doomsday scenario. They're this really bad impact, and so people tend to shut down or become depressed. They don't want to hear anymore. And what's great about SoundCitizen is that a lot of the things that we measure are lighthearted and fun, like the cooking spices, but lets them think about, okay, so if I'm unintentionally sharing the vanilla in my cookies with Puget Sound, what other things could I be sharing? Another part of our story is that we're measuring what we're calling emerging pollutants. They include things like some pesticides, a few pharmaceuticals, plasticizers, industrial solvents, and also perfumes. These compounds are generally thought to be okay in low concentrations, but harmful in high concentrations. However, there's this growing body of research that's indicating that long-term exposure to complex mixtures of chemicals can be just as harmful as high doses of a single chemical.
It turns out that when we use these chemicals in the products in our homes, they end up not only in our bodies, but also in the bodies of fish and wildlife, and contaminating sediments and waters in Puget Sound. Many of these chemicals act like estrogen, and so we see things like feminized fish, male fish that are producing eggs, male fish that are responding in ways that female fish should be, because there's an excess of estrogen-like chemicals in the water. In people, what we see are increases in asthma, in problems like learning disabilities. We see infertility on the rise, some types of cancer are on the rise, and there are chemicals like BPA, phthalates, toxic flame retardants that are linked to these diseases that are on the rise. Some of these chemicals are also in products that literally go down the drain.
Everything that goes down our sinks, our toilets, our showers, our washing machines, our dishwashers, all of those chemicals get transported to the wastewater treatment plant. Now that water gets cleaned, but it can't clean out all of the chemicals. And so a lot of these are being piped out directly into Puget Sound. And when we start thinking about the context of millions of people, each contributing tiny amounts of several toxic chemicals, it really puts how our daily choices matter into perspective.
It's very difficult to solve these problems when we get to the wastewater treatment plant level. A much simpler way to go about it would be to design our products in a way that makes sure that they don't contain toxic chemicals. Because if I don't have a toxic chemical in the product in my home, it's not going to end up in my laundry water and get into Puget Sound. We're going to be on a toxic treadmill until we go farther upstream and make sure that these chemicals aren't in the products we continue to use.
When we think about environmentalists and who is an environmentalist and how it tends to come from this place of privilege, it's really easy to see these identity barriers that people have with being environmentalists or doing environmentally sustainable practices. You say that and it just conjures up all these identity issues. They're things that people are familiar with, and when they understand their sense of place, when they understand their connection, when that infrastructure of water becomes more visible to them, it removes those barriers so that people are able to think more about how they can have an impact on Puget Sound and what's important to them and their communities.